cheer from the wharf the fine ship sped, last waving, hearts craving. Goodbye, goodbye, love's tears are shed, dull throbbing, low sobbing. O southern swell, I sigh for the sweets of the fond farewell. Proudly she breasts the ocean wide, stars gleaming, sweet dreaming. Fearless her fame for wind or tide, far moaning foreboding. O southern swell, thy boom on the shore is a tolling bell. Full bursts on the storm with staggering force, slow speeding, all heating. Hardly she keeps her proper course, sea churning, foam spurning. O southern swell, sad tragedies lurk in your kelpin shell. In the year 1869, Lund's Blue Anchor Line steamship company was formed. At the beginning of their service history, the company only ran small sail-powered cargo vessels from port to port, rather than transatlantically. Though as the decades passed, the Blue Anchor Line slowly grew to be a more prominent England to Australia shipping service that undoubtedly was extremely reliable. By the late 1800s, the Blue Anchor Line was a major player in the Australian steamship service market, where they owned reliable vessels including the SS Commonwealth, perhaps the most fast and luxurious Australian steamship of her time, and the SS Geelong, a wildly successful liner whose design proved to be popular. In September of 1907, an order was placed for a ship to be constructed, a vessel that would be almost identical to that of the Geelong, but scaled up and made more luxurious. Her name would be the SS Waratah. On September 12th of the following year, the Waratah was launched stern first, where she was promptly fitted out and completed just in time for her maiden voyage, which was scheduled to take place in just under 2 months' time. The Waratah contained a luxuriously fitted saloon with a well up top that led to her drawing room. A small dome was placed above the well, allowing for sunlight to pierce into the vessel and providing an open and airy feel to the interior. Just after the drawing room was an ample staircase and cabins located in one singular compartment. On the aft portion of the vessel, one would find a veranda-styled cafe which overlooked the ocean, and a private smoking room that was connected directly to it. Her cabins were situated in an orderly and convenient manner, with them being fitted to 1908 standards. The vessel was not the most luxurious ship ever built, especially when compared to that of the transatlantic liners, but she nonetheless was an extremely comfortable one that gave you the feeling of being at home and rather cozy. On the 5th of November of 1908, the Waratah left London on her maiden voyage with some 750 passengers and crew aboard her. She was under the command of the prestigious Captain Joshua Edward Ilbery, a veteran of the Blue Anchor Line with over 30 years of nautical experience underneath his belt. Her intended route was to sail from England to Australia, where she would stop at dozens of ports along the way. While on her maiden voyage, early in the morning of December 6th, the second officer reported a small fire in the starboard coal bunker. The fire was largely brought under control by noon on the same day, but it continued smoldering for another 4 days. The steamer, after 2 months of stopping at various ports, and especially Africa, proceeded to Australia, where she arrived in Melbourne and later Sydney. Afterwards, she took on more passengers after dropping off her previous cargo of passengers, and she sailed back to London on the 9th of January of 1909. During her maiden trip, however, the steamer was criticized immensely by the experienced captain and her terrified crew, as it was quickly discovered that the Waratah had an immense stability issue. In the calmest of seas and in the finest of weather, the vessel had the tendency of suddenly heaving from one side, which created alarm aboard the ship. It was said, in fact, that the passengers frequently talked amongst each other about the unusual movements of the vessel. Captain Ilbery reported to the owners of the ship that she did not have good stability and that she was unsafe. The crew also brought this issue to the table, and this resulted in the Blue Anchor Line higher-ups and the builders having a heated argument following the vessel's return to England as to whether she should be overhauled to fix this massive stability issue or not. Upon arriving in England following her return voyage, the Waratah was indeed refitted. However, it was not in her favor, for nothing was done to fix the stability of the ship. In fact, it seemed as though the added machinery and refitted interior only worsened the instability of the vessel. On April 27th of 1909, the refitted Waratah set out on her second trip to Australia, carrying 22 first cabin, 193 steerage passengers, and with a total crew of 119. On the outward trip, it was largely uneventful, and the steamship arrived in Adelaide, Australia, on time on June 6th. The ship, per usual, continued on to Melbourne, where she plowed through a strong gale, during which the vessel heaved from starboard to port abnormally as a result of her dangerous instability. She continued on to Sydney, where her seasick cargo of passengers disembarked, some of which filing reports due to them feeling genuinely unsafe aboard the top-heavy steamship. The Waratah loaded her cargo for the return voyage and departed on June 26th. She stopped to complete her loading at Melbourne and Adelaide, and she set out from Adelaide on July the 7th, bound for the colony of Natal port of Durban, onto the Cape Colony port of Cape Town, and continuing to Europe. The Waratah reached Durban on the morning of July 25th, where one passenger, Claude G. Sawyer, abandoned the ship and sent the following telegraph to his wife in London: "Thought Waratah top-heavy, landed Durban." He had decided to disembark at Durban, as he had been nervous about the top-heavy behavior of the ship during his voyage. Sawyer later claimed to have experienced a premonition that the vessel would go under. Spooked from this, he abandoned ship. Either way, it was this decision to abandon ship, despite paying for a ticket, that inevitably saved his life. The Waratah left Durban at 8 p.m. on the evening of July 26th, with 211 passengers and crew aboard her. At around 4 a.m. on July 27th, she was spotted on the starboard side by the Clan Line steamer Clan McIntyre. The Waratah was a faster ship, and so she managed to pass the Clan McIntyre at 6 a.m., sailing ahead at a speed of 13 knots. At this point, however, the weather was already stormy and the waves were pounding against the Waratah's hull, causing her to pitch and heave heavily in the waves. At 9 a.m. that same morning, the Waratah was out of view from the Clan McIntyre, and the Waratah was never officially seen again. And that's it. That is the story of the SS Waratah. All 211 passengers and crew aboard the ill-fated steamship disappeared without a trace. Well, kinda. I would be lying to you if I told you that this is where the entirety of the story ends, for a few hours afterwards on this same very day, a few unofficial sightings took place of the SS Waratah. One of these sightings, in fact, cluing us in as to the unfortunate fate that took place aboard the ill-fated SS Waratah. Later that day, the weather deteriorated quickly, with increasing wind and rough seas. On July 28th, a violent hurricane sprung up in the area, so bad that the captain of the Clan McIntyre said it was the worst weather he had experienced at sea in his 13 years as a seaman, with winds of exceptional strength causing tremendous seas. That evening at 9:30 p.m., an unconfirmed sighting took place from the Union Castle liner Gilf, heading north to Durban from the Cape of Good Hope. She passed the ship and exchanged signals by lamp, but because of the bad weather and the poor visibility as a result of the storm, she was only able to identify the last 3 letters of the name, T-A-H. The undoubtedly top-heavy Waratah pitched and heaved tremendously in the hurricane-like weather. The passengers and crew aboard her undoubtedly were in fear of their own safety, as they were in the previous voyage. Waves were crashing over her bow, and she was just off the coast of land when her terrible fate likely took place. Edward Joe Cocker, a rifleman who on July 28th of 1909 was posted to carry out military exercises on the bank of the mouth of the Zora River, recorded in his diary that he had observed through a telescope a steamship, which matched the description of the Waratah perfectly, which appeared to be struggling slowly in the heavy seas, a southwesterly direction. Conker observed the ship roll heavily to starboard, after an immense wave broke over the large vessel, and then before it was able to right itself, a second wave surged over the vessel, causing the ship to fall onto her starboard side, slowly beginning to keel up, and then shortly after, disappearing from view, leading Conker to believe that she had gone under. He reported his sightings to the base camp of the orderly sergeant, who apparently did not take the matter seriously. He did not come forward with the story until 1929. The Waratah was expected to reach Cape Town on the 29th of July of 1909, but she never reached her destination. No trace of the ship has ever been found. Due to the top-heavy nature of the Waratah, the most likely explanation for her disappearance is that she most probably completely capsized and sank with everybody aboard. The Waratah, due to how top-heavy she was, likely fell over onto her starboard side rapidly, which would have caused the engines and boilers aboard her, unable to sustain themselves at such a pressure, to collapse and fall through the vessel. The terror-stricken passengers and crew aboard her would have had no chance, for the ship would have likely capsized in such a rapid manner. After the ship fell onto its side, her many cargo holds must have imploded from the sheer force of the roll, causing her to slowly fill and capsize until she was well and truly upside down. She from that point onwards would have gone under rapidly, taking all aboard with her. No debris nor bodies were found, meaning that the vessel had to have gone under in an extremely quick manner, adding credibility to the theory of her having capsized. Inquiry shortly afterwards took place, where the issue of stability was quickly dismissed. However, as the years went by, it was quickly realized that the stability might have in fact been the reason in which the Waratah disappeared on her fateful final voyage. In the end, no conclusion was reached as to why the Waratah disappeared. The case, more or less, was simply dismissed. The Blue Anchor Line never fully recovered from this incident, but they financially went under rapidly as a result from the immense loss. the Peninsular and Oriental Branch Line Steamship Company purchased out the Blue Anchor Line that same year in 1910, where the remaining ships of the Blue Anchor Line were used under the P&O branch service to Australia. After 1914, the Blue Anchor Line practically disappeared completely from the public eye, much like the Waratah did 5 years prior. The story of the Waratah no doubt is a very much dramatic one, for the history of the Blue Anchor Line Steamship Company no doubt seems to have been leading up to this moment, in which their newest and largest ship, a flawed ship, capsized on its second voyage and sank, bringing down one of the most prominent Australian shipping companies of all time. In the end of the day, there are several theories as to what might have happened to the SS Waratah when she disappeared. For an example, there's the theory in which she exploded and sank. The captain aboard a ship by the name of the Harlow claims to have witnessed the SS Waratah disappear. The captain of the Harlow claims to have watched two bright flashes take place on the horizon, where the SS Waratah was meant to be. Another witness who watched these two bright flashes, however, firmly claims that these in fact are Australian brush fires taking place near the shoreline. As a result of this claim by the captain, it has been speculated that the Waratah has been destroyed by sudden explosion from one of her coal bunkers. After all, her coal bunker was on fire during her maiden voyage. Coal dust can easily self-combust during the right conditions. However, no single bunker explosion can cause a ship the size of especially the Waratah to sink instantly without any trace whatsoever, giving this theory almost no credibility whatsoever. Another working theory is that the SS Waratah, which was carrying in her cargo holds about 1,000 tons of lead and 300 tons of lead ore concentrate, might have liquefied due to the motion of the ship. Now, this can affect the stability of the ship due to the free surface effect, which could have caused it to capsize. In 1909, however, there was very little awareness in regards to the danger of this material, meaning that proper precautions would not have taken place in order to properly secure this material. However, there is nothing to back this theory up, and no evidence to support it whatsoever, making this theory quite unlikely until we can find the wreck of the vessel. There are also reports of potential sabotage that might have taken place aboard the SS Waratah, which might have caused a massive explosion that would have sank the ship. However, this ties back to the initial explosion theory in which I talked about earlier, where there is no evidence whatsoever to support this. Here's an oddball theory. This very theory, the whirlpool theory, has no evidence whatsoever. However, people have suggested that the Waratah might have been caught into a whirlpool by a combination of winds, currents, and deep ocean trenches beneath her, several of which are known to be common off the southeast coast of Africa. This would explain the lack of wreckage, but as said previously, there is almost no evidence whatsoever that a whirlpool, especially sufficient enough in strength to suck down a 450-foot-long ocean liner, could have been created. The most plausible theory that indeed does have evidence supporting it, however, and the very theory in which I dwelled on in the most of this very documentary, is the tidal wave theory. To briefly recap this very theory, it is believed that the SS Waratah might have disappeared as a result of a tidal wave, which crashed over the ship, causing her to capsize and sink instantly. Now, this theory has credibility, especially when you take into account the overwhelming reports of the Waratah having the tendency to roll, and overall being a very top-heavy vessel. After all, the very captain of the vessel himself, as well as the crew, went to the Blue Anchor Line and complained in regards to the vessel's instability. Professor Mallory of the University of Cape Town in 1973 suggested that waves of up to 20 meters or 66 feet in height did occur, and that the steamship Waratah most likely encountered one of these waves, which is what caused the most likely top-heavy vessel to capsize and sink on instant. Let us jump several decades ahead into the future for a moment, and let us talk about the MV Derbyshire. The motor vessel Derbyshire, which was a British bulk carrier that sank in the Pacific Ocean, broke up and sank as a result of extreme weather and the heavy waves pounding against the ship, undoubtedly creating stress and tension within her hull. Of the countless theories that have been made in regards to the disappearance of the SS Waratah and what might have happened to her, the tidal wave theory undoubtedly has the most credibility and is most likely what indeed happened to the SS Waratah. The wreck site of the Waratah has never been located, and over 110 years later, not a single trace has been found. The disappearance and undoubted sinking of this vessel remains a mystery today that few are aware of. She has been rightfully dubbed the Australian Titanic due to her undoubted significance in Australian history. Until we can discover her wreck site in the future, the mystery of the SS Waratah will likely never be solved. Until then, we can only speculate the true horrors which took place aboard the Waratah during her final moments. Now, before I conclude this video, I really just wanted to take the time to talk about the families briefly that were broken apart and torn apart as a result of this terrible incident. Now, 211 passengers and crew embarked aboard the SS Waratah on what was meant to be a standard routine voyage. When the steamship Waratah disappeared, all 211 passengers and crew aboard her vanished with the vessel. Not a single body was recovered, and not a single piece of debris was found. For not a single body to have been found, there was no closure whatsoever for any of these families, and that by itself is a terrible tragedy by its own. Many, if not all of these families, were never able to let go of this and simply move on, just because of the fact that not a single body was found. For your family member to embark on a 450-foot long steamship during the Edwardian era being a time in which man had infinite faith in their technology, and for that technology to suddenly vanish with all aboard, it's an absolute shock and undoubtedly a wake-up call that prevents you from moving on whatsoever. I dedicate this short film to the 211 passengers and crew of the SS Waratah who perished when the SS Waratah disappeared from human eye. I also, of course, dedicate this short film to the families who were affected as a result of this terrible calamity which took place. May the 211 passengers and crew members of the SS Waratah rest in everlasting peace, for they shall never be forgotten. As I stated earlier in this short film, no trace of the vessel, even 110 years later, has ever been found. The vessel is still completely missing. Today, efforts are being made to locate the missing Waratah. However, until then, one can only speculate the true calamity and horrors which might have taken place aboard the SS Waratah when she disappeared and undoubtedly sank on her fateful final voyage.